this chapter, we are going to look at web multimedia and interactivity. When we're thinking about really well-designed websites with lots of great animation or graphics or video or audio, we have to think about how the browser renders those things. So things like images are pretty easy for a browser to render. It knows how to show and display those files. But when it comes to other file types, sometimes our browser may need a little more help. We often need to use plugins or helper applications to give our browsers more functionality. So if you've ever opened a PDF document from online, in Google Chrome, it usually opens in another tab. There is some kind of helper application that allows Google to render, or Google Chrome to render that PDF document. You see this with other plugins like QuickTime and Windows Media Player. And web design, deep in web design, there are a ton of plugins that help us do what we want to do as web developers. But one of the most common plugins that will be going extinct this year is Adobe Flash. And Adobe Flash, it's gone away like the dinosaurs. There's a really interesting article on Ars Technica about Adobe Flash. If you used a computer, a few years ago, you probably saw pop-ups like this. It is sunsetting this year, but we do have to take into account that Adobe Flash was really pivotal in helping the internet become more interactive. We had a lot of Adobe Flash games back in the day, and it really did help web developers see all that they could potentially do with Adobe Flash. Now the things that we used to have to use Adobe Flash for, we can do with HTML5 elements and some other plugins. Adobe browsers like Google Chrome and Safari began to think that Adobe Flash was a little insecure with users' data. So even Google Chrome has removed it. It's often flagged as a security risk even if you try to enable it. So Adobe Flash is one of those plugins that has gone away. Now, when we're thinking about using these plugins or helper applications, we also need to think about the container and the codecs. The container is designated by the file extension, and the codec is the algorithm that's used to compress that file. So an example audio container would be an MPEG-4 audio. It has an extension of .m4a. And an example codec for that, it uses advanced audio coding to encode that file. An example video container would be an OGG. It has a file extension of .ogv or .ogg, and it uses the Theora codec, which is open source. That means it's completely available for developers to see the code that makes the encryption work or the compression work. So when we're thinking about codecs, the original media is usually a large file. We need a codec to encode it in some way. This is that code that encodes the original file, and that creates our digital file. So once we have our digital file, if the user wants to play that back on their device, they need that codec to decode that digital file. If they don't have that codec, then they can't see that video or audio or whatever it is. So that's why we need to consider these as we progress. You may have interacted with codecs in the past if you've tried to download things from the internet. You guys are so used to streaming now that you may not have ever had this problem, but there's software like VLC Media Player that contains lots of different codecs, so usually if files won't work in anything else, they'll work in that VLC Media Player. But often you would need different types of software that would have those codecs to encrypt or decrypt that file so that you could watch it or view it or listen to it or whatever. Okay, for our first project, we're going to code a site the simplest way possible. The simplest way to add audio to or video to your website is just to create a simple link to that. So in this case, we're going to create a simple link to a podcast. So if you look at your HP11-1 folder, inside that folder you have a few files. We have index, which I've opened in code. We have podcast MP3. We have a podcast.ogg, and we have a podcast.txt. This is going to represent our transcript, and we're going to give the user both these options so they can choose which option to listen to our podcast with. We're only going to create simple links for this, so after the H1, we're just going to do a href. The first one I'll do is the MP3, and let's tell the user that it's an MP3, and then let's add a few breaks. Next we'll code the OGG and add a couple of breaks. Finally, we want to display the transcript or a link to the transcript. Okay, if you need to pause the video and copy those over, feel free to do so. And let's view in the browser. Okay, so here we go. We have our 3 links. The podcast episode 1, if you're on the Mac, we'll try to open iTunes to play. This link will play right in our browser, so if we click that, and I'll let you listen to that podcast on your own, should you choose to do so. It's short, it's only a minute long. And then here is the transcript. So this is what's actually said in this podcast. So providing the transcript is a great way for people who, for the people who are hearing impaired. And then providing these multiple links gives the user options depending on what type of device they have and what software they have installed. Podcasts are pretty cool. They're usually just some kind of audio show, interview. There are plenty available online. You have a podcast app on your phone, so if you ever get really bored, I encourage you to check those out.